Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, for me there are two issues with regard to Mr Sherwin's report. The first one is the integrity of our tax system, and the second one is New Zealand's global reputation. Now, Mr Robinson and Mr Little have talked about the integrity of our tax system, which is incredibly important to our global reputation, but it also matters around what is fair. It plays into the very narrative of who does what with who pays tax, when and how. I suppose, Mr Speaker, one of the things in this report Mr Sherwin notes is that New Zealand is committed to, and I quote, integrity, openness and transparency, ensuring that its legislation and enforcement activities meet or exceed global best standards, taking a leadership role in these initiatives and acting to address and rectify issues of concern. Mr Speaker, that is what our global reputation is on tax issues. And Mr Speaker, I would argue strongly that in fact we have fallen behind in maintaining the integrity of our tax system, to the point where the IRD said, with regard to base erosion profit shifting measures, that we are not even going to be able to meet our international obligations. In fact, there are early adopters in this space, then there are then there are countries who said they would do things on time, and our recommendation to Cabinet was we were actually not even going to meet the timetable. We were going to be a year late. Mr Speaker, I'm not too sure if this is because the Minister is not over his portfolio. I'm not too sure if this is because the IRD is overworked, or I'm not too sure if this is because the government just does not care. Whatever the reason is, it is wrong. Mr Speaker, the fact that John Sherwin put a chapter in his report called New Zealand's Reputation shows that he understands the effect of this on our global reputation. What is this reputation worth to us? Well, in 2005, the then Ministry of Economic Development tried to quantify the value of this, and they came up with a figure of $20 billion a year. Mr Speaker, there's an organisation called Transparency International. The index ranks countries on a scale from 1 to 100 based on external surveys and assessments from 13 reputable international organisations. So these aren't Kiwis who come up with this measure. These are international arbiters who determine whether New Zealand has a reputation worthy of the past or what is happening to it. Mr Speaker, in 2012, we were number one. We were number one. In 2014, we're now fourth. Now, the countries who are number one are Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and then New Zealand. Now, I'm the first to admit that fourth out of 100 and however many countries isn't bad. But the thing is we trade on this global reputation. It's what we go overseas, it's what our companies take as one of their main tools in their bag of I was going to say tricks, but in their bag of unique selling point. We come from New Zealand, that means something. And if it fails to mean something, then we're in big trouble. Then what happens is we become just another small economy hawking commodities to an ever-competitive global world. At this point in time, being from New Zealand means something. What Mr Sherwin said about Transparency International's, our drop in Transparency International's ranking is, and I quote, "While it is not clear what caused this drop, the downward move is regrettable and demonstrates there is no room for complacency." And yet, Mr Speaker, it appears that complacency is the very thing that this government has got in spades when it comes to this. This is a big issue, and not just for the integrity of our tax system, but the integrity of our global brand. Mr Speaker, the press around this was damning of New Zealand, and in a way, reputation is about perception. And often, as we all know, perception doesn't take account of facts. If the Australian Financial Review writes, and I quote, "While New Zealand's tax laws are a major plus for foreign investors, it's not the only attraction. They also come to use New Zealand's good reputation." And if it also says, quote, "The papers held by ICIJ show how Mosaic Fonseca bragged to clients how easy New Zealand laws make it for foreign investors to hide their tax-free profits," unquote, then we have a reputational problem. Now, whether this is true, whether we are a tax haven or not, and John Sherwin actually does say, and I quote, "It might be argued that the foreign trust regime is a preferable tax regime and this is sufficient to make it a tax haven," Whether that's the truth or not doesn't really matter, because if the global community has a perception that New Zealand is in some way corrupt, or is in some way an easy target, or allows criminals to hide money, or is anything but squeaky clean, or is anything but how we market ourselves overseas, then we are in real trouble. So, Mr. Speaker, this whole issue is not just about the integrity of our tax system. This whole issue is not just about the reputation of our tax system. This whole issue cuts to the very quick of what it means to be a New Zealander, what it means to be a New Zealand company going overseas, what it means to be a small New Zealand company going overseas and standing on what we believe our global unique selling point is. And that is a reputation for being upfront, for being honest, and for doing things the way that things should be done. Mr. Speaker, there is one way to rectify this now, because the damage has been done, but I think the way we can get this underway and mitigate the risk is get this legislation before the House as soon as possible. Amy Adams, you heard her say, just really made I failed to see a sense of urgency there, and this is the Minister of Justice. We've got the Minister of Revenue, who I think now finally understands the scale of the problem, whereas in the past I would argue that even he failed to grasp the severity of this, not only of our tax system but our global reputation. But I do believe he now understands it, and I hope like hell that this report has been a wake-up call, because John Shewan is a man of integrity. Of that I have no doubt. John Shewan has made his reputation. John Shewan is a man of integrity. No, he is a man of integrity. But John Shewan also understands the fact that his reputation, that his business, that his set of skills, his unique set of skills, also is dependent upon the reputation of this country. So Mr. Shewan knows that if we do not get this right, if we fail to address this in a manner that meets the expectations of the global community, then not only does his reputation suffer, but the reputation of this country and the reputation of our tax system suffer. Mr. Speaker, I think that the only way forward for this is to get legislation in front of the House as soon as possible. It does need to go through the Select Committee process. I absolutely agree with that, because we do need to hear what the submitters to this report said. MPs need to hear that, but we also need to hear what other players in this game think. But we need to get this legislation into this House. We need to get it passed as soon as possible, and we need to rectify this situation. Mr. Speaker, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, the global tax system is in trouble at the moment. There's a whole lot of stuff. It's called base erosion profit shifting. This is about large corporates not paying their fair share. We know this is a major issue. We're trying to deal with this at this point in time, thank you very much, through the OECD process. It has to be done in a multilateral way. But what this does, Mr. Speaker, is this just is I was going to say an unwelcome distraction. That's actually belittling what this is. What this is just another, it's an issue we need to deal with immediately. But unlike base erosion profit shifting, we are the only ones that can deal with this. We don't need an OECD mandate to do this. All we need is the legislation to be passed to correct it. And I hope like hell, Mr. Speaker, that the day the Minister got this report, and I'm assuming he didn't get it yesterday, but let's assume he did, that the first thing he did was he called his officials in and he said, I want legislation drafted now that is going to implement every single one of John Shewan's recommendations. I want it done under urgency. It is the #1 priority, and we must get this in front of the House as soon as possible, because the damage is now done. The damage is now done. All we can do is mitigate it. Because, Mr. Speaker, I just want to reiterate that there are 2 points here. The integrity of our tax system must be upheld, but most importantly, the reputation of our tax system and the reputation of our country is now on the line. Let's do the right thing. Let's get this through now and mitigate the risk that is already out there. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Bill.